Collect TV's Darren Rovell here with Ben Burrows of Collect. And Ben, on Friday morning, the Paul Skenes rookie debut patch autographed, of course, sold for $1.1 million on Fanatics Collect. Your opinion on the price?
I think it's frankly groundbreaking. Obviously, there's quite a few factors here, Darren. Uh, we don't see that much money for pitchers, right? Pitchers are very risky. Collectors are cautiously pessimistic, I think, about a lot of pitchers. So seeing this type of number for a pitcher in any capacity, especially one that is not in the inner circle of baseball collecting, is frankly just pretty shocking. But also, I think it is sort of a landmark sale in the history of this program and Fanatics Collect holistically. It's part of the biggest auction that they've had since the company acquired PWCC and then rebranded it as Fanatics Collect. They did over $10 million in sales Thursday night, Friday morning. It's the most expensive debut patch to sell in at public auction by a pretty significant margin. It basically 5X's the second one, which also sold Thursday night, Friday morning in the Jackson holiday. So frankly, it's shocking that it hit $1 million plus.
Okay,
But
so listen, not many people give Fanatics credit when credit is due, right? I
right.
mean, listen, they are a company that for some reason, people gravitate to the negative on them, overly so, perhaps. But what they did right is the rookie patch is a brilliant idea to put a patch on something, that then goes on the field, is then taken off and is put on the card and then autoed. This is probably, one of the coolest things that's been done, and they're going to do it in other sports. And the hobby clearly says, yes, this is something that makes sense, and we want it. So that to me, that's one. Two, there was some scrutiny over, they made this card, Fanatics owns Tops, and then they got it for auction. But let's go back to uh, people not believing in pitchers. Why is that? Is that because people think the next thing that's going to happen is they're likely to hurt themselves and have Tommy John, and they're scared versus injuries for a shortstop or an outfielder?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think the injuries are a very big factor. Pitchers get injured in I think, a more devastating way than position players more often. There's a very specific body part that they have to manage in their arm and their elbow, and those things explode on a regular basis. At this point, a lot of the hardest throwing pitchers in baseball have had Tommy John surgery, and now we've sort of gotten into the space where it's almost expected that you'll get Tommy John at some point, and people are wondering, when are you going to get the second one? There's some experimental surgeries, that are coming out that are a little bit new that are, I think people are hoping will replace Tommy John in some capacity. But also, frankly, Darren, pitchers, when we have a starting pitcher like Paul Skenes, he plays once every 5 days, right? Maximum. In the playoff,
Relevance.
maybe it gets down to once every 3 days, once every 4 days. Position players are playing every single day. And I think it's a little bit easier to get attached to those guys.
I
And then,
agree.
frankly, home run is king. Paul Skeens isn't hitting a whole lot of home runs. It's
Okay,
tough.
so now let's get into the Pirates, okay?
Mhm.
How much does that, when you're thinking about value here, whether to buy it or not, we have to think about like postseason ability to win it all, zero. Uh, so where does that fall?
I think it's very important. I don't think championships are quite as important in baseball as they are in basketball, let's say. I think people understand that a player in baseball has much less individual impact on a team than they do on a basketball court or even in football with the quarterback. Paul Skeens again is only playing once every 5 days, and then playoffs maybe once every 3 or 4 days. Um, and so I think there's less pressure there, but also eventually, and we're seeing this with Mike Trout right now. Mike Trout at one time was considered the greatest player of his generation, which he may still be, but collectors have cooled on him some. I think his
And
record still
some of that is team, some of that is team, some of
it,
that
it
is
is
definitely team.
it is the team's success. Are you excited about buying a player for millions of dollars? And Trout has multiple $1 million sales. Are you excited about buying a player for millions of dollars if you know that they virtually have zero chance of winning a title? People thought Mike Trout might have one, but the guy that was going to help him is now across town with the Los Angeles Dodgers and Shohei Ohtani.
I think there's also concern about wins and losses. Listen, last year Paul Skenes was 11 and
Right.
3, had under a 2 ERA and was able to win. Um, I do think, even though we are in the era of advanced stats, that if Paul Skenes has a 2.2 ERA, but is his team can't win for him, and is and any when we're looking at like a full season and whatever is like 13 and 9. I actually do think wins and losses still matter, even though it's not his fault versus straight up ERA.
Yeah, I think there's a very good chance at this point. Unfortunately, we know the Pirates at this point. The team has not been good for an exceptionally long time. The team also hasn't been willing to invest financially. They haven't signed a free agent in years at this point. I think the popularity, frankly, that he's had so far is shocking to me. I think
Agreed.
Paul Skeens is awesome, but I'm just seriously surprised that he has been so popular when everyone knows that he is on a team that's not competing for a title. They're probably not going to compete for the playoffs. The ownership is not going to invest in it. And I think there are serious fears by a lot of collectors, and it's one of the reasons that I'm surprised this sold for as much as it did when his potential on the field is sort of capped outside of what he can control every fifth day.
What do you think about the card in the future? So let's take out, I mean, there's a million other things in terms of macro and microeconomics, but
Mhm.
5 years down the road, is this considered a good buy?
I have a hard time saying that. If 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 I had to make a call right now, I would say that if it's sold in 5 years, I think it would probably sell for a loss. And I think a lot of the factors that we just talked about, pitchers are very scary to collectors. The fact that he's not playing on a team that is going to be competing for a title, I think there's a very real possibility that 5 years from now, there's going to be no playoff appearances for Paul Skeens, unfortunately. And we don't see a lot of $1 million sales for ultra modern cards. We don't see that this is the first ultra modern baseball card to sell for as much as it has since 2022. That was a Mike Trout. We just frankly don't see these types of cards, even as great as this one is, sell for this amount. And so 5 years from now, I think we would have to see some incredible stuff on the field, and we would have to see some incredible stuff, I think, in the market holistically for it to go above 1.11 if the winner of this card decided to put it back into the marketplace.
Now, there's one thing we didn't talk about, and that is Livy Dunn. Yes, you pitch every 5 days, but she gives him a relevance, right? That with a partner that arguably no baseball player has had in the modern era, right? Like, I'm not going to call this the Joe DiMaggio, Marilyn Monroe, but there's something there. Is that worth anything to this card?
So I think the pop culture relevance that she has helped bring him, wider appeal, but I think that's been cooked in. That's been cooked in already. I think we're
Yeah.
seeing that with the 1.11 million. I don't frankly know how it expands beyond what it already is. And then from
Right.
that
The
point,
question is, once she's not at LSU, then she's got to really create a little bit more relevance, right? Because there's less talk about her NIL and what can her partners do to make her more relevant. There's not a gymnastics league. Yes, how many times are you going to show her in the box and supporting him and this and that? So yeah, I think that's an interesting one. My last question to you is this. Is there any value to the person who buys this coming forward and saying, I bought it? There seems to be real potential media value here. And do
yeah.
you think anyone bought this, the person who bought this in the next 48 hours is going to come forward and try to, you know, amortize the cost, uh, through publicity.
So, with that question, do I think they would benefit from it? Probably. I think, it's always going to be an interesting story with a card like this. It has been the most talked about card, Darren, over the last, year or so. It's been the most anticipated card over the last year or so. So, whoever bought it would probably be doing themselves a solid to come forward and tell their story and help people understand why they purchased this card, but frankly, we don't see it often. So the other half of that is I don't think it's going to happen. I very much want it to happen. I would love to be one of the people to tell those stories, but so many people that are buying these $1 million cards, they rarely come forward. Eventually, we sort of hear things behind the scenes, but very rarely does it happen publicly. But especially if this person is famous or a celebrity, it would be absolutely in their best interest to put themselves back into the spotlight because frankly, that might have been why they bought the card in the first place, right? So I think in the next 24 hours, maybe we can get lucky and someone will come forward and say that they're the buyer and uh the Paul Skenes saga that has been going on for months and months and months can continue for a few more days.
Collects Ben Burrows with me, Darren Rovell, talking about the Paul Skenes card that sold for 1.11 million on Friday morning. And just a reminder, the Pittsburgh Pirates will pay Paul Skenes $875,000 for the 2025 season. Pretty crazy.